Mm-hmm. Hi, Sandy. I'll be with you in a minute after doing some sharing. Mm. Hello, everybody. How are you tonight? I'm doing pretty well myself. Had a very nice day today. Hope you had a very nice day too. Only regret I have today is a regret I have every day, specifically that Bernie Sanders dropped out too early. Sandy says, me too, sharing as well. Be right back. Bonnie says, hi, everyone, welcome. Deborah says, here, I came outside and told my house guest, my mom, I was going to be out here because I'm studying. She can't stop talking, diarrhea of the mouth. So I've missed much of your reviewing lately. Well, Deborah, you can always catch up, right? Steve Day laughs. Steve Day says, I get mouth thing too. Love you, Mom. Kay says, hi, all. Deborah says, hello. Kay says, having some internet problems tonight, but we'll catch up as much as possible. Okay, very good. Any other comments I may have missed? I see Steve Wolfbrand is here. Hi, Steve. Nice to see you. Please share as much as you can. The attendance is a little small right now. It's a little better. Oh, Dolores has joined. Hi, Dolores. How are you? So tonight, I thought it would be a good thing to have a Q&A session on two books and on MMT in general. So I am at your disposal. What would you like to ask? What did you have trouble understanding in the two books? What trouble do you have in understanding MMT for that matter? Ah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Things are quiet. Okay, let's just have some comments about any old thing, and we'll take it from there. And we'll lead into the MMT Q&A. Kay says, I'm getting to understand MMT, very well written books, both of them. They are, aren't they? They were very well written. Steve Day says, me too, Kay. Good cell signal, but slow on my phone. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, here's some news today. Let's see if that can help us get going. 300 plus law professors agree Congress should pass a bill tomorrow to end qualified immunity for the police. Well, that's a little bit off the MMT topic, right? As COVID-19 takes a toll, Betsy DeVos has announced for a new craven public school privatization scheme. She wants to resuscitate her failed agenda while people are preoccupied with the pandemic. Have you noticed that the contracts that are being let by the Trump administration are giving Big Pharma free rein to price gouge taxpayer-funded coronavirus drugs? Of course, what MMT would say is that the drugs weren't taxpayer-funded. They were government-funded. So in a way, they were voter-funded. They were funded by the people in that sense, but they weren't really taxpayer-funded. And the reason why they're not is because taxes don't fund anything. They make space for things to be funded. But other than that, no. Kay says, Chrome keeps going out for me on my PC. I have something that may be a cure for that, which is switch to the Opera browser, but make sure in your task manager that Chrome has been thoroughly closed. In other words, when you boot up your machine, you make sure your Chrome is closed, and then boot up into Opera and use that to surf the web. The footprint is smaller, and it should be better for your PC. Steve Day says, encourage Sanders to talk MMT. Sanders just can't. He just can't. He keeps wanting to rely on the tropes. For example, I'm starting to hear fireworks out my window, even though they're not due till tomorrow. Bernie just did something. I forget what, but he just started talking about taxpayer funded this and taxpayer funded that again. It is very discouraging. Doesn't matter how many times he learns taxpayers don't fund for anything. He still keeps talking about the taxpayers. Kay says, did you guys see that Herman Cain came down with COVID from Trump's Tulsa rally? I did. I did. What is my opinion of Steve Grumbine? I thought that we went through this earlier. Uh, I'm not going to make any personal statements about Steve. I think that he has educated a lot of people in the beginnings, okay, of MMT at least, and that he's done a very valuable job, okay, in doing this. He keeps at it, and he has a lot of people who like to work with him. And if they do, that's fine with me. He's not interfering with what I'm doing here, so that's great. We both have the same goals in mind, which are to get people to commit to MMT and to legislate the policies for the public purpose based on MMT. He's for climate justice. I'm for climate justice. He's for social justice. I'm for social justice. He's for economic justice. I'm for economic justice. So we're sharing in the same journey, even though we're not explicitly working together. So that's good. That's all I'll say about it. Next question. Next question. That was a good question, Steve. I don't mind answering it. Next question. So, we have a crisis coming up. A big fight is shaping up next month. You saw the job figures, I'm sure. 1.4 million new unemployment claims. 1.4 million. While meanwhile, the economy added, what was it? 5 million new jobs. Or if you want to put it that way, 5 million jobs came back. But there were 1.4 million new unemployment claims. Pretty much the same as last month. There have been something close to, 46 million unemployment claims now, the 47 million unemployment claims. The U3 unemployment has fallen, I believe it's to 11.7% now, something like that. And the Trump administration was crowing about it this morning, seemingly unaware that there is a little problem. And the little problem again is we've opened up the economy, and as a result of our opening up the economy, we now have much more COVID again. California, Texas, Florida, Arizona are going crazy with new cases. That's happening. There's no getting around it. There is no getting around it. So with all the new cases, we're going to have an increase in the death rate. Many people who are forecasting now that we're going to be getting up to something like 1,000 cases a day again. And we've been seeing that. We now have deaths per million population, and the USA has now risen to 397 deaths per million population. Brazil's rising fast. It's up to 292 deaths per million population. These nations still haven't reached the level of Spain, which was at 607 per million population. Well, the UK, which is at 648 million, or 648 per million population, or Italy, 576 million. But of course, the new cases in these countries have leveled off. France is at 458. So it remains to be seen. Will we pass Spain's death per million at 458 and Sweden's at 536 per million soon? Will we eventually pass 842 per million we've seen in Belgium? We've already surpassed 357 per million. That was in the Netherlands. So there we are. In deaths per million, we're one of the worst in the world, and we haven't bent our curve now. It's certainly true that we are exploding again, which means that people aren't going to keep going to work. They're going to stay home. Businesses that have reopened are going to shut down again, and they're going to shut down again soon. When they do, those unemployment figures are going to kick up again, and they're going to kick up higher and higher and higher. There's going to be a second wave of economic crash coming before even the second wave of COVID-19, because what we have now is really just a continuation of the first wave. We never really flattened the curve on the first wave. And Materato says, Joe, why does MMT keep having to answer the question about inflation? Because from the MMT standpoint, one of the big questions is how you devise policy to have full employment and other very good economic effects without having appreciable inflation. Two primary goals of MMT, which are subsidiary goals of public purpose, are full employment and price stability. So as people recognize that MMT is right, that there is no problem of fiscal sustainability, there is no problem of government insolvency from deficit spending or from sale of the debt instruments. And what MMT then says, and what other people also recognize, is that the thing to keep an eye on, the real problem to be addressed, is the problem of inflation. And so MMT brings that up itself, says, hey, we shouldn't be looking at the size of the deficits and the size of the debt. we should be looking at demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Those two types of inflation have to be treated in different ways, and we have to control them in various ways, and we have a set of tools to do that. So MMT has to keep having to answer the question about inflation, because MMT says that the real thing to be concerned about, okay, in economic policy, the real thing to be concerned about when government spends, okay, is whether government spending or excessive private spending, excessive spending by anyone, will lead to inflation. We MMTers ourselves say that. In Stephanie's book, what did she say? She wants the CBO not to worry about forecasting or projecting what's going to happen with the deficit or what's going to happen with the debt. She wants CBO to project instead, when considering policy alternatives, what effects are these going to have on inflation? Thank you, Deborah. And Matt says, with the ability of the government to tax, it can always handle excess money in circulation. So what is the big deal? Well, the big deal is that, of course, we can build in higher taxes through automatic stabilizers. But the fights over taxation are always hard political fights. And from a political standpoint, it may be better to handle inflation in a different way. Furthermore, we don't always know who to tax in order to handle the problem, okay, of inflation. Raising taxes, okay, in general, is a blunt instrument. It may be that inflation is being caused by cost push factors in certain specific areas of the economy. If you put through a general tax, you may handle that inflation problem, but also cool off an economy which in general doesn't have to be cooled off. So you may want to use other methods. For example, in the Second World War, the government cooled off inflation by selling savings bonds. It didn't want to tax excessively because people were already sacrificing a tremendous amount for the war effort. So where possible, it didn't want to take away people's money. It would rather have them save the money and not spend it. So it sold the savings bonds. In certain areas, it might like to dampen down inflation by regulating pricing in certain areas or by regulating wages in certain areas or by opening up new sources of supply in certain areas. From the MMT standpoint, there are lots of tools to use to dampen down inflation. Taxation is a very important tool, but it's only one such tool. Steve Day says, I asked Steve G today about organizing activists to lobby Congress members with Stephanie's and Pavlina's new books, with constituent appointments like lobbyists do. I don't understand what you mean with constituent. Oh, I see. Constituents making appointments with their Congress members in which they leave with their Congress members Stephanie's book and Pavlina's book. I think that's a pretty good idea. Buy your Congress people those books. and give them those books. Say, I feel so strongly that what the economists in these books are telling us is right, that I'm gifting you with copies of these books. I want you to read them and learn what they have to say. And then I'll be back to talk with you in a month. And I'll want to know what you think of these books and why you won't enact policies consistent with the economic outlook in these two books. That might be a very good thing to do. I kind of like that idea. You're buying the Congress people those books. We'll persuade them that you're serious because you spent some money on them. Evelina says she shared. Thank you, Evelina. Steve Day says the Real Progress in Action nonprofit with Steve Grumbine et al. Is incorporated as a 501c4. Okay with the IRS. Is it a C4 or a C3, Steve? I knew Steve was doing this. Where the Center for the Public Purpose is incorporated as a nonprofit in the state of Oregon. We haven't tried to get our 501c3 yet from the IRS because there's really no need. The only thing we're doing at this point at the Center for Public Purpose is these live streams, and New Macro Media, or the company, is actually an LLC, and the media work that we do through the LLC is not going to be tax exempt anyway. We will pay our taxes. So Kay says, Status Quo did a live report from New Jersey in Allentown, Pennsylvania, talked to people about the coming depression today. Yeah, I saw some of the Newark, New Jersey report. Status Quo does very good work on the ground. I really like what Jordan is doing and what Jen Dyes, is doing. They're both really good people. Joe, do you know of any social theories that explain the docility, of our electorate? An alien visiting our planet may rationally wonder, why do the 99% take this abuse? I know many social theories that would explain it, but of course, the difficult part is in applying those social theories to explain why the 99% take the abuse. I think the ruling class has been very skillful at siphoning off the discontent. I think this is partly because they've been boiling the frog very slowly. We, of course, the 99% of the frog, and they've been boiling the frog rather gradually over more than, let's say, 45 years now. And the frog was much less docile 45 years ago. But now the frog is beginning to awaken again because the frog is realizing that it's been had. Bonnie asked me, does Japan use MMT? No, not really. In other words, Japan has been hearing about MMT, and like other nations or decision makers, in other nations, is beginning to learn some of it. Are they just ignoring deficits? No, they don't ignore deficits, but what's been going on there is kind of run some deficits to stimulate the economy, watch the GDP ratio, the debt to GDP ratio rise higher, start getting alarmed at that when they shouldn't be getting alarmed, okay, because it doesn't matter at all, which then leads them to back off. When they back off the deficit spending, it hurts the Japanese economy. Then they get alarmed again. They start deficit spending again. And they've been doing this since the 1990s. And there's just been a gradual increase in the debt to GDP ratio. They've been basically vacillating from good times to not so good times. But everybody take note. They have generally higher employment rates than we have here in the United States, and they have a much stronger safety net than they have here in the United States. So the population, but generally speaking, has a more equal situation than it has here in the United States. And the average Japanese family is probably living better than our family, and has also a lot more security in old age than our family has.
Should that teach the people in the U.S. something?
The lesson in Japan should teach us something, and what it should teach us is that don't pay attention to the debt to GDP ratio, because you can have the highest debt to GDP ratio in the whole world, and your economy still is not going to collapse. None of the predictions about the harm that's caused by a high debt to GDP ratio has been fulfilled in Japan, even though they have by far the highest debt to GDP ratio in the whole world. So they're really a very good case that what the MMT economist is saying, okay, is very good. So to speak about social theories that explain the lack of civil strife that we have had here in the United States for a long time, the proper application of certain social theories, including one of my own, could probably explain that. I won't go into the theory here because it's a mathematical theory, and it would be a little complex to apply it also to today's specific situation. I wrote up this theory during the 1970s, and it's published in certain books, and I can give you the references. I don't think it's easily accessible on the internet, because when I originally published it, it wasn't on the internet. But anyway, there were a lot of good social theories dealing with the causes of civil strife during the late 1960s and early 1970s. And I was writing, okay, at that time, that. So I do know some good social theories, okay, that can explain that. But basically, the historical context is the slow boiling of the electorate and the all kinds of diversions which made people think they were doing well. Remember, while wages were staying stagnant for all those years, the Federal Reserve was goosing the housing market. So in many of the urban areas of the country, millions and millions of people were getting extremely satisfied with the great gains they were making in housing value. And in turn, they would use their houses as basically credit cards. And they'd live better because they were borrowing money from the equity in their houses. And everything was going along well. They thought they were getting more and more wealthy because the value of their houses was skyrocketing. And so they were getting wealthy. In fact, some of them got fairly wealthy because they cashed out at the right time, and they gained $500,000 to $600,000 in equity from their houses. Then they moved down to Florida, where they could get another house far more cheaply, and they still had a nest egg. And they didn't notice that their wages were pretty stagnant I mean, they may have noticed, but their main source of wealth wasn't coming from their wages. It was coming from their property. Jeff Epstein says, "Hi, Joe. Regarding taxation driving the currency, uh, um, what is this? Marketization means creation of markets. That's the first time I've seen that, but okay. Um, and monetization means creation of money. What is commodification or commoditization? I think what commoditization is making something a commodity that is more than a commodity. Okay? In other words, the commoditization of people. We used to do that with slavery. A commodity is something that can be bought and sold. So with slavery, we were making, but being human, at least a human of a particular color, a commodity. So that is commoditization, I think. Kay says, "Hi, Jeff. Glad to see you." Jeff says, "You too." Steve says, "My Dem Progressive Caucus still talks like we must reduce the national debt." Yes, they still don't know. Hopefully, Stephanie's new book will teach them that they don't have to worry about the national debt. In future sessions, I'm going to start going over with you some of my books. For example, my book on fixing the debt explains very clearly why the size of the national debt ought to be of no concern to us, why the size of the debt, okay, to GDP ratio also should not be of concern to us, that neither of these things is related to fiscal sustainability. Steve Day says, by Representative Huffman, that is. Huffman is not very progressive, I'm afraid. He is a faux progressive, a faux progressive. Also, I've written a book called Who Needs Balanced Trade? Who Needs a Balanced Budget? And I think I'm going to be going over that book with you soon. It has a lot to say about the relationships between the twin deficits, the trade deficit, okay, and the budget deficit. And it has a lot to say about how both of these deficits should be addressed within the same framework, specifically the framework of the public purpose, and how our budgeting and our trade policy needs integration. I don't think anybody else is talking about that except me. None of the other MMTers are really talking about the need for that integration and the need for integration around the public purpose. I think that's something you also should be learning about. So I think I'm going to start talking about that sometime next week. Evelina says, "Ha ha, makes you want to scream, doesn't it?" Nat says, "Can you explain why we cannot resolve economic issues in a scientific manner? Is there no way to empirically verify the truth, okay, of MMT?" Well, okay, Matt, you have to understand, okay, that MMT is not a theory. MMT is a framework. And the framework outlines an approach to economics. Okay, now in the approach to economics, there are contained certain hypotheses, okay, and also theories. For example, within the MMT approach, Eric Batimone has advanced a theory of inflation. He's worked out a mathematical theory, okay, of inflation. We could try to verify that particular theory as well. The sectoral balances, sectoral financial balances accounting framework but gives rise to predictions about what will happen if we do certain things. Those are theoretical propositions. They can be empirically tested. And in fact, MMTers claim that they predicted the kinds of fiscal problems which the European countries ran into after the recession of 2008, and that they were correct in their predictions. There were certain predictions that were made by Warren Mosler as well as what would happen to the Europeans because they gave up their currencies. Those came true. The MMTers also predicted what would happen if the stimulus that was passed in 2009 would not be large enough. And the predictions of the MMTers came true. MMTers were saying all through this time that the recovery was going to be a very slow recovery. The MMTers criticized the Obama administration bitterly for beginning to emphasize its version of fiscal responsibility in early 2010. The whole fiscal sustainability teaching counter conference, which was an MMT conference, was in response to the Peterson doctrines that were being advanced at the Peterson Foundation Fiscal Summit on that day. That was a summit that was carried out in league with the Obama administration and in support of the administration's turn towards tight budgeting. And our whole conference, our whole counter-conference teaching at the time was critical of what they were doing. It presented the MMT approach in response to what they were doing, okay, and it advocated for a job guarantee, for a very large fiscal stimulus, far larger than they had, involving complete Social Security tax cuts and very substantial revenue sharing with the states based on a certain number of dollars for the population. These three policies were recommended specifically as a way to get us out of the Depression. And MMTers said if this was not done, we were going to be in the, we would be recovering from the recession of 2008 and 2009 for a very long time. MMT predictions there were correct. Matt says human beings can understand the standard model in physics. Matt, what do you mean by the standard model in physics? Are you talking about the Newtonian model? Because if you are, remember the Newtonian model has been falsified. It may be the standard model in physics you're talking about now. Okay, are you talking about the standard model in quantum theory? You're talking about the standard model, okay, in quantum theory. That seems to apply at the subatomic level, but it doesn't apply at the macro level, where the theory, okay, of relativity still reigns. And that says we can sequence the human genome. Why cannot MMT be demonstrated in a scientific manner? I think gradually it is being okay. I think that MMTers do pursue MMT in an open-minded and scientific manner, looking for tests of the propositions that taken together constitute the MMT framework. But once again, since MMT is an approach, since it's a framework, okay, it cannot be verified as a whole paradigm, because paradigms are not really verifiable as a whole. But there are theories within the paradigms, hypotheses within paradigms that can survive testing. I also want to say, I want to get away from the verification idea. I personally don't believe that theories can be verified. I think it's logically impossible to verify theories. On the other hand, I do believe that theories can be falsified, and that the testing of theories, comparative evaluation of theories, and the measurement of the survivability of theories is the proper scientific approach. I think that if you compare hypotheses and theories that come out of MMT with hypotheses and theories that come out of other economic frameworks, you will find that the ones coming out, okay, of MMT survive much better when faced with empirical evidence as compared, okay, with other theories. But I think the effort to empirically verify MMT as a whole, that's a logically misconceived effort. It will never happen in the nature of the case. That takes me into something else I could talk about for a long time here, but I'm not going to do that. It would take up too much of the live stream. If I get a little time later, I may go into it more deeply, Matt. You've asked very good questions, of course. Steve Day says, attempted to give purchase, there was a glitch using the congressional office building address. If you want to give them a book, I think the thing to do is to go see them. Your congressperson, okay, is in your district. From time to time, they're accessible in your district. If not the congressperson in person, people at their office are accessible in your district. You can go see them, and you can go talk to them. You can send your message, and you can leave your book. or books. Steve says they include both a 3 and a 4. I'm not sure what you mean. Sandy says, shared. Hello, everyone. Evelina says, Israel adopted some form of MMT. What currency do they use? I'm not aware of them adopting MMT or some form, okay, of MMT. The currency the Israeli used, I think they used the Israeli pound, but I think when you break down the currency into its smallest units, I think they're using the shekel. I think they do have shekels again in Israel. The shekel was a biblical currency. If I'm not mistaken, they use shekels. But anyway, we should check after this. I know they used to use the Israeli pound when they just got started. But maybe they've shifted over to the Israeli dollar. Evelina says, hi, Lana. Jeff says, a quote from a forced out of paper taxation and primitive accumulation in the case of colonial Africa. Yeah, I know about that. Taxation also played an important role in the monetization and commoditization of African economies. Yes, they did. So England keeping all that good, the Venezuelan gold, what will they do with it? Just sits there. They ought to start making nice jewelry out of it and sell it. Then they could destroy the currency. It would be a good way to destroy the currency. Matt says, how would a job guarantee apply to raising children? Right now, the backbone of our economy, having and rearing children, is uncompensated work. Well, okay, the job guarantee, okay, there can be in the MMT job guarantee, there can be variations in the provisions, and something would still qualify as an MMT type, okay, of job guarantee. Right now, the way it would work is you might write the job guarantee legislation in such a way that if a local community decided to make the job of mother, okay, an MMT compensatable job, it would become a compensatable job. And mothers would be paid to raise their children the JG rate. I think there might be some trouble in getting pay for the full amount of time it takes to raise your children, but I don't think it would necessarily be too hard to get paid for 8 hours a day for that. A single mom with a child, could a JG support her work as a mother? Any thoughts about that? Yes, I think it depends on the stakeholders in the local community and whether they will approve that as a job. It seems to me the way the MMT legislation is going to be written, it could leave that open for local communities to do, and then the federal government would be obligated to send the paycheck to mothers who want to stay home and rear to rear their children. This has come up in lots of debates about MMT when MMTers, okay, were blogging a lot just after 2009, okay, in 2010. Some of us really think it's perfectly okay to pay mothers under the JG to make the job of mother a compensated job. It's an essential job, a really, really essential job. And if mothers want to stay home and work at it and don't want to farm it out to schools or childcare centers, it seems to me it should be compensated. I'm all for it. My job guarantee legislation would have that in it. Sorry, I went too fast, folks. I got to get back to where I was. Okay. I think I've given some thoughts about this, Matt. So Jeff says marketization is a word for Marx. Also quoted in that paper along with monetization and commodification. Okay, thanks, Jeff. Jeff says humans are a commodity that can be bought and sold after imposing taxes. Wow, that explains it. Thanks. Oh, Jesus. Steve Day says empirical evidence fails to disprove MMT. Okay, let's talk a little bit about failing to disprove things. Okay. From a really scientific point of view, it's impossible to disprove things with certainty. There can always be skeptical attacks that are levied, okay, in any attempt to disprove an empirical proposition. So we always have the case that lack of certainty applies, that our knowledge is always fallible. Having said that, if MMT people advance a hypothesis concerning what should happen under such and such the conditions, and observation shows that what is supposed to happen does not happen, then that presents a refutation problem for the MMT hypothesis involved. That such a refutation problem gets more serious if there are other competing hypotheses that are not refuted by the empirical evidence, where the MMT hypothesis is refuted by the empirical evidence. So, okay, but it is true, Steve Day, okay, that right now, I don't know of a single instance where an MMT hypothesis has been disproven thus far. You'll see MMTers like Stephanie Kelton, okay, and also Mike Norman make those kinds, okay, of claims. And even though I don't often make them myself, I agree with them in the sense that I do not know of an MMT empirical hypothesis which has yet been refuted by the evidence. Evelina says not a framework, not a theory, a framework, an approach. Specifically, okay, in the deficit myth, Stephanie calls MMT a framework. You know, I tend to prefer calling it an approach that involves the use of a framework. And I've done that, okay, in other places. Kay says, maybe the word theory needs to be changed. No, the word theory needs to be used the way it's used in all the sciences. There shouldn't be a special use of theory in economics or other social sciences that's distinct from how the term theory is used, okay, in the other sciences. But in all the sciences, there's a difference between a theory and a framework. In other words, a theory is a set of propositions that are tightly related, okay, and they're related by the rules, okay, of logic in some way. Theories are deductive in structure. And the difference between a theory and a hypothesis is often vague. That is because every hypothesis, in order to test it, involves accepting some propositions that are background propositions necessary for measurement or for testing. So if you look at the hypothesis and all the auxiliary propositions that are needed to test the hypothesis, one could say that one has a theory there. But theories tend to be grander structures of logic than hypotheses are. Jeff Epstein says society needs children to be raised. So, yes, it can, and it must be considered a JG job or compensated in some way. I believe so, Jeff. I think so. We must define work, value, and productivity away from the current meaning of making a rich white guy richer. Yep, Jeff, I completely agree. Evelina says, the modern money approach, MMA instead okay, of MMT. Well, when people say modern money theory, they're not really speaking of a theory. They're talking about the framework. Actually, they're talking about the modern money framework when they say modern money theory. They're not talking about a specific theory, a single specific theory. They're talking about the framework. So maybe it should be called the modern money framework. But I think what it refers to is people writing in a particular way. In other words, people theorizing by writing down things using the modern money framework. And that has a name, and that name is modern money theory. Or maybe when people say modern money theory, what they mean is the body, okay, of literature, which uses the modern money framework. That could work, Evelina. Evelina says, really, your idea is a good one. Thanks, Evelina. Evelina says, or keep MMT and add A for theoretical approach. Modern money theoretical approach would be MMTA. Alice Little, not sure how being a mom is not compensated. Most stay-at-home moms get room, board, okay, and unlimited allowance. Well, it's limited by the resources of the family, but the point is it's not work which is compensated by something external to the family. So, in other words, we live in a market economy of some sort, and partly a market economy. It's not a free market economy, but the market, okay, is important. Inside of the market economy, people get paid for jobs that they do. The job of mother is a job that is very important not only to the family but to society. So the question is, should society as an external force be providing compensation for moms or dads, whoever is the primary agent at home, taking care of children and raising children, should they be compensated by the society that they are contributing to? And I think they should. Jeff says, doesn't matter what the press says, doesn't matter what the politicians or the mob says, doesn't matter if the whole country decides something wrong is something right. This nation was founded on one principle above all else, the requirement we stand up for what we believe, no matter the odds or consequences. When the mob and the press and the whole world tells you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree beside the river of truth and tell the whole world, no, you move. I like that. I like that, Jeff. Joanne on the house, Ricardo says, copy this link and pasting in comments on right-wing groups' posts. Thank you. Evelina says, theories cannot be falsified, just falsified. That's it, Dr. Joe. Yes, I admit I'm a Popperian. I am a critical rationalist. Evelina says, I think theory needs to go as people take words so seriously, especially educated ones. I know theory is not the best thing to call it from the standpoint of popular usage, okay, or by usage that is actually political. But from the standpoint of science, it's perfectly appropriate to refer to the theories that are being developed using the MMT framework or the MMT approach. Alice says theories can be falsified. That's why we subject them to the scientific method. If a theory cannot be replicated verifiably, then the theory may not be valid. Well, it's actually the tests or the experiments that are the things that are replicated in science. And also the findings of those tests, okay, and experiments have to be replicated. The findings have to be the same within reasonable errors, okay, of measurement. Okay, the scientific method involves proposing theories or hypotheses. In other words, theories are part of the scientific method insofar as there is part of the scientific method. Also part of the scientific method is testing our theories. Also part of the scientific method, okay, is measurement. Also part of the scientific method is the use of logic. So a whole bunch of things are part, okay, of the scientific method. Also, it's arguable that there isn't a fully agreed upon scientific method. Okay, but really, processes that are implemented by scientists such that we would generally agree about these processes, that they followed a recognizable or abstractable scientific method. Evelina says Alice is educated. She is. Evelina says, Alice, you're educated. Matt says, JG would be federally funded, but how would it be administered? Would we have state boards that prioritize the needs of each state? I think the role of the states in this would probably be minimal. Instead, the way it would be administered is that the needs of each locality in each state would be primary and would be prioritized. And the states might have some very general criteria for the kinds of things they would like to be supported. But the real focus on this is federal funding and local administration as opposed to state administration. Alice Little says, this Alice wants to know the best place to stash 20,000 right now. I'm not thrilled with my current investments, except for Apple. It's too high to buy, as is Tesla. Well, there might be some MMTers. I think there are some MMTers who could probably give you some pretty good advice about that. Okay, but not all MMTers are primarily concerned with their investments or with the stock market or how it's doing right now or giving investment advice to people. I consider myself, an MMT writer, and I think after 10 years I know MMT fairly well. But at the same time, I'm much more interested in the macroeconomic uses of MMT than in studying investments and things like that. People who are very good at that, though, and who might have some very good advice. I know some. I think, that Warren Mosler is one such person, and Mike Norman, is another such person. And I'm sure there are other people who spend a lot of their time trying to evaluate what is going on in the markets, the stock market, and what it makes sense to buy and what it makes sense to sell, and what is the best place to stash $20,000 right now. But I don't even think that I would want to take a guess because I just don't spend my time doing that. Jeff says, K. Clark Ryan. That's my way of saying we don't change the name because people might use it against us. We stick with MMT because it's right. If we change it to try and avoid difficulty, they'll just find something else to use against it. Yeah, and then the fact that it's called modern money theory, that doesn't mean anything. In political science, there's influence theory, and there's power theory, and there's democratic theory. That just means thinking about the democracy. That's all it means. What MMT means is thinking about modern money. And it turns out the modern money isn't modern. Also, it was just a name that was given to this particular style of thought, and the name stuck. And there's nothing about it that's really right. Okay, Alice, I still have something to say about one of your comments I'm coming upon here, but I went too fast in my scrolling and I'm not ready to consider it yet. So if you hang in there, I'll eventually reply to your comment about my saying that there's no agreement on the scientific method, because I have a particular place where that comes from, which I'll pick out for you when I get to your comment in just a few minutes. But I want to take the comments, in order. Kay says, I see, Jeff. And Evelina says, too bad about that gold. Venezuela could sure use it to buy medical supplies and such. Well, actually, I don't think it would be paying in gold, would it? It would have to sell the gold for the currency that it needs to buy the medical supplies. Jeff says, that's my opinion anyway. I think it's a good opinion. Alice says, if we're going to pay mothers, then you'd have to charge them rent and split bills. It sounds complicated. I don't think you'd have to charge them rent. Okay, in other words, if the state were paying mothers the $15 an hour, then that additional income would just accrue to the family. That's all. And it would allow women who wanted to stay home and raise children and who were single mothers to do that. So that's the way that would work. And they'd already be paying rent, of course, because they're still in the private economy and they still get charged rent by somebody, right? The case says, Jeff, I just have noticed how many college educated people don't even want to look at it. Thought that might be the reason. Evelina says, in Argentina, women with children under 6 get paid under new administration. Nice, isn't it? Evelina says, not very positive, are you? Be happy. Alice says, my biggest fear is I have a couple 100,000 and I'm on disability after applying in 2014 and finally receiving it last week. Now I'm getting asked to apply at my old company, Apple. And I wonder if I take a 100K job and go off disability, I'd have to start over from scratch. And if I don't, then I need to know where to park my 6-figure pittance so Chump can't pilfer it and I'm able to depend on it. Gosh, I hope this is not too long and too selfish. Okay, again, I don't know how to answer that question because if you take the 100K job, okay, I don't know how long you would be able to keep that 100K job. Do you? If you get to keep it only a couple of months or something like that, then you sure don't want it. You sure just want to have your disability. On the other hand, if you think the 100K job is going to be a secure job and you're going to have it for the next 5 to 10 years and go off, okay, of disability, then it still may pay you to take that job. If you want a place to park your 6-figure pittance, which is going to pay some interest, and which is guaranteed to pay the interest, okay, to pay the principal, if you're looking for something absolutely safe, then Treasury securities are absolutely safe. Actually, repayment of Treasury securities is guaranteed by the Constitution. Okay, that's pretty safe. Of course, they don't earn much. But the certainty of getting it back is very high. Al says, gosh, I hope this is not too long and too selfish. It's interesting. Kay says, pretty bad when Argentina is ahead of us. SMH. Jeff says, I think they don't want to look at MMT because the paycheck requires they don't agree with or understand it. That's the case with a lot of economists. Al says, I thought you meant MMA, mixed martial arts. Jeff says, please consider taking a look at Pavlina Tcherneva's new book or her pretty definitive website, http pavlinatcherneva.net, job guarantee, frequently asked questions. But the basic answer is federally funded, locally administered, not unlike the public schools. That's a good answer, Jeff. I like that answer. Evelina says, no, Kay, it's hard right now in Argentina. New administration, only 6 months old, inherited a virtual default on OMS loan and high unemployment. There's also the pandemic. I know. Kay says, when the last crash of 2008 happened, my late hubby and I worked rehabbing houses to be sold. We always had the hardest time getting paid for the rich people we worked for, even if it was only a few $100, Jeff. Evelina says, might be how they get rich in the first place, in part, at least. Shame on them. Evelina, we had to finally quit working for the HOA, Homeowners Association of the Rich Bitch Beach in Wilmington, because of that reason. I guess HOA is the Homeowners Association, right? Evelina says, I feel it. Alice says, not an agreed upon scientific method. I need to look that up. Thank you. Well, there are many people who are going to say that there is an agreed upon scientific method. Almost the first thing I learned when I began to study the philosophy of science was the idea that there was an agreed upon scientific method, and the author outlined it very, very carefully. But I'm going to read you, if I can lay hands on it, I'm going to read you something by Karl Popper. What is it? Karl Popper was a famous philosopher of science. He was a polymath. He lived from 1902 to 1994, if I recall correctly. And one of the many books he wrote, was Realism and the Aim of Science, and that was part of a trilogy. And I believe, if I recall correctly, he starts off one of the chapters in here. He starts off by saying, he wrote a very famous book called The Logic of Scientific Discovery, which he originally wrote actually during the 1930s, but it wasn't translated into English and published in English until 1958. Then he wrote a much longer book. He wrote other books in between, but he wrote a much longer book called The Postscript to the Logic of Scientific Discovery. And that was actually turned into 3 books, into a trilogy. And the first book was Realism and the Aim of Science. Now let me see if I can find the passage that I'm looking for to read to you. He was the founder of the critical rationalist school and the falsifiability school of philosophy of science. Let's see if I can find the passage that I'm looking for here. Yeah. Okay, he was at the London School of Economics. His chair was, he had a chair as a professor of logic and the scientific method. I'm sorry, I have to excuse myself for a second because the reading glasses I have on are not appropriate for this book. I'll be right back. Let me There's a couple of people. I'll never forget what Carl had to say here. I always think of him as Carl, as if I knew him. I never did. Okay, as a rule, I begin my lectures on scientific method by telling my students that scientific method does not exist. This is the preface he wrote in 1956 to the postscript. I add that I ought to know, having been for a time at least the one and only professor of this non-existent subject within the British Commonwealth. Are you listening, Alice? It is in several senses that my subject does not exist, and I shall mention a few of them. First, my subject does not exist because subject matters in general do not exist. There are no subject matters, no branches of learning or rather of inquiry. There are only problems and the urge to solve them. And then he goes on in this vein arguing with that. And then he goes on, he says, so much about the non-existence of subjects in general, but scientific method has a somewhat peculiar position in being even less existent than other non-existent subjects. What I mean is this. The founders of the subject, Plato, Aristotle, Bacon, and Descartes, as well as most of their successors, for example, John Stuart Mill, believed that there existed a method of finding scientific truth. In a later and slightly more skeptical period, there were methodologists who believed there existed a method, if not of finding a true theory, then at least of ascertaining whether or not some given hypothesis was true, or even more skeptical, whether some given hypothesis was at least probable to some ascertainable degree. I assert that no scientific method exists in any of these three senses. To put it in a more direct way, there is no method of discovering a scientific theory. There is no method of ascertaining the truth of a scientific hypothesis, i.e., no method of verification. 3, there is no method of ascertaining whether a hypothesis is probable or probably true. Having thus explained to my students that there is no such thing as scientific method, I hasten to begin my discourse, and we get very busy. For 1 year is hardly enough to scratch the surface of even a non-existent subject. What do I teach my students, and how can I teach them? And then he goes on to talk about the art, of argument, and he talks about the criticism of knowledge claims that we make. He does not call them knowledge claims. That's my terminology. But he says, I believe the so-called method of science consists in this kind of criticism. Scientific theories are distinguished from myths merely in being criticizable and in being open to modifications in the light of criticism. They can be neither verified nor probabilified. So I won't go further than this because it takes too much time. But what I wanted to show you, Alice, was where I got this from. It's from the book Realism and the Aim of Science. It was published by Routledge, I believe in 1981. I'm sorry, it was published in 1982. The first of 3 books that form the postscript to the logic of scientific discovery. And this portion that I was reading from was the preface that he wrote in 1956, entitled On the Non-Existence of the Scientific Method. So that was his view of the scientific method, and he was one of the most prominent of the philosophers of science of the 20th century. There are many people who disagree with him about this. I'm not even going to say that his view is the dominant view, but I believe that his view is the right view, that he was right. And I'm prepared to argue the point until the cows come home. So that's where I get my view from. Going on. Evelina, if we had known then what I know about it all now, we should have done it ourselves instead of working for other people. I keep pulling this down too fast. Evelyn, if we had known then what I know about it all now, we should have done it ourselves instead of working for other people. Evelina says, hybrid, laugh out loud. Evelina says, Alice Little, hybrid, laugh out loud. And Steve Day says, gravity theory, too. Evelina says, MMTA theoretical approach, I meant, laugh out loud. Matarado says, is the Tlaib Jayapal, the Minta coin bill, the biggest advance of MMT on the national stage? I don't know if it's the biggest advance of MMT on the national stage, but it might be the most obvious advance of MMT on the national stage. Okay. That bill, in fact, in the most immediate way, was based on the consulting, okay, of Rowan Gray. And he drew on work that was done by myself, okay, and other people in the early parts of the 2010 to 2020 decade. He also drew on his knowledge of the law, which is considerable. He has both considerable knowledge, okay, of economics, and is also, I believe, still going through law school at Cornell. Probably finished very soon. Alice Little says, I co-wrote an econ book in 2005, found the link between money and air, and how money is really a big mystery as far as valuation is concerned. Thank you for your time. Sorry to get personal. That's okay, Alice. I enjoyed it. Come back. And Kay says, good question, Matthew. And Steve Gonzo says, modern monetary technologies. Yes, we could define modern money technologies. Alice says, having kids could be profitable. Well, there's no allowance per kid. There would only be, in other words, you could have that. In other words, in France and Germany, they have in Europe, they have allowances per kid. This would not be the case here. The job guarantee would pay the job guarantee wage for 8 hours a day, or however many hours a day with full employment. Evelina says, perfect. Kay would agree, right? And Steve Day says, don't go there with the welfare moms thing. Alice says, exactly. K, not J. They don't know about J. Laugh out loud. Thank you. I think you just helped me make a decision about taking the job. Thank you. I was listening to the Treasury and their value. Yes, they don't earn much, but I'm a little nervous. And Matt says, oh my God, I feel like I am in Joe's study with him when he gets up and pulls books off the shelf. And Jeff says, Ray's congressional testimony and the reason he did it was pretty epic. Yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty good. It wasn't, if you're talking about the recent congressional testimony, That wasn't the first time he gave testimony to Congress. Evelina says, haha, cool, isn't it? Steve Gonzo says, modern money technologies, the branch now deals with the creation and use of technical means and their interrelation with life, society, and the environment, drawing processes such as industrial arts, engineering, applied science, and pure science, the application of this knowledge for practical ends, the terminology of an art, science, etc., technical nomenclature, scientific or industrial process, invention, method, or the like. The sum of the ways, Ibish and Weebus. Thanks for the link. Evelina Apani says, yes, it's brilliant. You're a genius. I mean it. Kay says, sounds great to me, Steve. Alice Little says, I'm looking forward to reading the trilogies. You mean Popper's trilogy? Oh, sorry. Alice Little says, aha, fascinating. Steve Day says, I like seeing Joe go to the bookshelves. Steve says, I've been pushing it for years. I got tired of explaining what theory means in the context of MMT. Exhausting. Scientific method does not exist. Oh my God, it's like when I read says gold does not exist or some such assertion. I was floored at 17. Lena says, God, need to head off. Thanks, Joe, Kay, and everyone. Good night, Jeff. Night, Jeff. Night, Jeff. Glad to see you and talk to you. Dr. Joe goes right to the spot. I feel retarded. Alice says, realism in the aim of science, 1982. One of three, perhaps non-existent. I want to be able to refer back to this. Thanks so much. It would be a guaranteed job. It would be a guaranteed job offer. It would have made me more likely to have kids. Oh, I don't know. That would be good or bad. It depends upon your values there. And I think in cases like this, I'm not sure there's a right or wrong. So Matt says, interesting discussion tonight. We had mentions of Popper and Sartre. Yes, Sartre is S-A-R-T-R-E, if I'm not mistaken, if I recall my Sartre, and if I recall my pronunciation. I read a lot, of Camus, actually, when I was young. I was into Camus before I was into Popper. Anyway, there was one thing I wanted to cover, if we get to it a little tonight, and I guess we're about done, but I did want to mention No Exit. Yeah, there's No Exit. Yeah, I read No Exit, yeah, among other things. But I wrote a series some time ago, which is still up at the Daily Costs. My blogs there are within the Money and Public Purpose blog, which I was the administrator of for a time, still may be for all I know. But my handle there is Let's Get It Done. It's a capital L. Okay, Let's Get It Done. All one word. Okay, let's get it done. And I have a series. It's a 15-part series, if I recall correctly, on the job guarantee and the MMT core. And in the latter part of that series, I became concerned about trying to give an account, of MMT as a holistic thing. So I wrote this blog, part 14. MMT is a holistic knowledge claim network. And so I'm going to read through this. It shouldn't take too long. The recent extensive blogosphere discussion on the JG and the MMT core began with a post by John Carney It stated his opposition to the MMT job guarantee proposal and claimed it either wasn't an essential component of MMT or that if it was, then MMT was wrong. Cullen Roche, a well-known popularizer of MMT, I should add at that time, this was written January 23rd, 2012, at his Pragmatic Capitalism blog, then asserted, quote, "It's not that I think the JG cannot be a component of MMT." Then he refers to Bill Mitchell and says, Bill drew a very clear line in the sand saying that the JG is central to MMT and not a peripheral, but that our knowledge, understanding, and implementation of modern money need not involve the JG. The JG might be central to the idea the founders had when creating MMT, but that just means it's central to the original concept of MMT as they saw it. So that was a quote from Cullen Roche. My reply was, this is true as far as it goes, but it's also true that the JG is still part of the MMT core because MMT is committed to public purpose. The MMT developers have tied public purpose to full employment and price stability. And the best knowledge we have at this point, after years of study of the JG, is that in the context of a program also specifying full payroll tax cuts and revenue sharing with the states, it is the policy that is most likely to produce full employment and price stability. But Cullen is proposing that the JG should no longer be considered part of the MMT core because, quote, they have by no means proven the JG to be the optimal usage of the government's government's monopoly currency supplier powers, despite substantial evidence and persuasive arguments, and in fact could come at substantial long-term cost. Instead, I think there are better options which can also lead to price stability and full employment. And then I go on with my reply. In earlier posts in this series, I've criticized the specifics of Cullen's and also John Carney's arguments against the JG, and I hope and expect I've shown there is little merit to them, and that they mainly consist of pointing to low likelihood side effects of the JG, disagreements with the objectives of full employment and price stability, and apparently lack of concern for the overall goal of public purpose. Here, I'll add that MMT writers can't possibly, quote, prove, unquote, that the JG program is the optimal usage of the government's monopoly currency supplier powers, unquote, because they'd have to prove that a better policy than the JG can't be formulated, and proving this would be proving a negative, an impossibility. Of course, it's possible to, quote, prove, unquote, that the JG program is not optimal for its purpose, as this can be done by proposing a single policy that works better than the JG. However, my previous posts have shown that rather than come up with such a policy, Carney and Roche have offered reasons why they think the JG won't work, and then have moved on to attack the objective of full employment with price stability as less desirable than other goals. In Carl Cullen's case, the goal of prosperity through full productivity, which Carney later concurs with. My purpose now is not to rehearse my earlier critiques of the views of Carney and Roche in earlier blogs in this series. That was. It is to address the more general important issues of how the core of any approach to economics, including MMT, emerges. What is part of the MMT core right now, and how such a core ought to be evolved over time. I'll begin in this post by introducing the idea of holistic knowledge claim networks in economics and its general implications for what should be included in such networks and MMT's knowledge claim network. My next post will present my assessment of the components of the MMT network right now, and the concluding post in the series will state my view of what's in the MMT core right now and how MMT ought to be changed in the future. And then I go on in this piece, which I will link to reflect on the nature of economic knowledge claim networks. And the first thing that I identify is first the people who form them, the knowledge claim networks, come to the task with ideas about the differences between the world as it is and the world as they want it to be. Let's call these the social value gaps in motivating activity. Okay, and you'll notice Stephanie Kelton started her book with social value gaps. Gaps like these always exist. People meet them with action when they know how to close them. When they think they need more knowledge to close them, they consider which social value gaps accompanying these knowledge gaps of problems, that is, they see are important enough to devote their attention to and which aren't worth their effort to try to close. A choice like this, the selection of a knowledge gap to be addressed and closed, requires a decision relying on the values people hold and the importance they attach to those values. There's nothing value free or value neutral about a decision. If an existing social value gap seems particularly important to people, and if they have the resources to address the knowledge gaps associated with it, they will select those as problems to be solved by the knowledge claim network they will be creating. Okay, and then I go on to basically identify what the other parts of frameworks and theories are. And I point out that conceptualizing categories, not just problems, but categories, frameworks, and theories, is in no way a value-free process. Of course, it's constrained by one's ideas about what the important knowledge gaps are. So the values affecting the problem phase of development certainly pass through to this one. But additionally, when one considers that formulating categories, frameworks, theories, etc., always involves consideration of multiple alternatives of each of these things, then it's also clear that there are decisions in other parts of the process of inquiry that values must affect. So then, of course, we get into considerations of, well, if values are through all this, then what is objectivity about? Where does objectivity come in? And there I say objectivity is about fairness, the willingness to consider major conceptual frameworks, including value propositions, theories, and hypotheses, bearing on a particular problem, or the problems. And then I move on to say that fairness, is about ending up, in other words, when you're comparing different things, you want to end up with a fair comparison set of knowledge claim networks and their accompanying theories, hypotheses, and data. Anyway, all this and other considerations leads to a specification in this blog about what the components of holistic knowledge claim networks are. And I claim that they are a fusion of fact and value claims, that they include social value gap problems, conceptual frameworks and approaches, theories and models and measurement models and data and narratives and policy prescriptions and data again, and also the whole track record of criticism, evaluation, and testing of various aspects of the network. And I say, I think the growth of knowledge is better served by a holistic approach that subjects everything to continuous criticism and evaluation, rather than an approach that restricts evaluation to the descriptive aspects of a knowledge claim network, considers a portion of that aspect of the network its core, and pins down the rest of the network as beyond criticism, evaluation, and test because it is assumed as a given. And then I say, so what? And I say, I'm sorry about all the meta theory in this post, but I think I need it to make some very important points. Even though one can state a purely descriptive knowledge claim network in economics, that network will be taken out of context and so will be incomplete. Specifically, it will be missing the context of value assumptions, accompanying selection decisions relating to social value gaps, knowledge gaps, hypotheses, models, theories, data, measurement models. It'll be missing the prescriptive propositions, combining the descriptive and value portions, of the knowledge claim network. And you remember in Stephanie's book, there are lots of prescriptive propositions. In Pavlina's book, there are also lots of prescriptive propositions. And then third is any narrative or historical context that isn't purely descriptive, but contributes to the understanding of the knowledge claim network. Remember all the historical context in Stephanie's book. Second, one can't easily decide what parts of the descriptive aspects of the knowledge claim network are at its core. So, and I go on, in this way to talk about the various components of the network. And let's see if I can get closer. Okay, so in this post, which was the 14th post, in this series, I was trying to holistically describe what was in these networks. And that includes, of course, the MMT knowledge claim network, what I've been calling the framework, of MMT. Okay. So this was blog 14 in my series. Actually, there were 16 parts to this. Let me see, before I close for the night. I'm getting very close to closing the night. And the series is on this page. I'm almost there. Yeah. Oh, I see. In part 15, I had the components of the MMT knowledge claim network, and then part 16 finished it all up with the conclusion. So if you want to look to what I thought were the components of MMT at that time, and the components of any knowledge claim network are always changing because new things are being added, certain things are being subtracted. But in this other blog, the 15th in the series, I have the social value gaps in MMT. I actually name them. And in large measure, they're still the same today. They haven't changed very much, I don't think, if you read through the list of them. I then have the knowledge gaps and problems formulated and were closed by the MMT developers. So you might want to take a look, at this particular blog. In a way, it'll give you a pretty good idea of what's in MMT, of what's part of the network, of knowledge claims, or what kinds of claims, are in there. I have some MMT solutions, that is descriptive components, generalizations, theories, models, facts that are given, in MMT. In other words, I name here what they are, and you can see lists, of that. So that might actually help to provide some context, for MMT. And at the end of these lists, including narratives, historical narratives and stuff, I conclude that the 15th blog, okay, in the series by saying it's not authoritative, it's only my construct. I didn't try to claim the list, okay, was gospel. But I think, okay, it's pretty good. And even from the perspective of 2020, it's probably pretty interesting to read. So I'm going to leave you links to parts 14, 15, and 16 of that. That is the daily cost things. I'll revise my description and leave the links in the description. So I see 16 of you are still here and hanging in. Boy, that's amazing. Yes, I will revise the description for you as soon as we get off. And I will give you links to, first of all, to blogs 14, 15, and 16 in that particular series. I will start to bring some of my books on here to read to you. I'll start with what I think are the two most significant ones, and then we can talk about them. Camus, C-A-M-U-S, Albert Camus, winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature. When did he win? He probably won in about 1958, 1956, something like that. CMUS, Albert Camus. Aren't those gaps growing? A lot of the gaps have been growing. Evelina says, I hate gaps like the one on my front teeth and the rich-poor gap. Yeah, I got gaps too, see? Kay says, I hear that, Evelina. My teeth are junk. Evelina says, laugh out loud. Has anyone heard of the JTP? I've heard of the JPL. I've heard of JPL too. What's the JTP, Steve? Jenkintown Posse. No, I haven't heard of that. Steve Gonzo says, the Goldbergs laugh out loud. It's my front teeth ruins the smile. Alice says, JPT. Evelina says, all my teeth are trash. I'm older than you, though. David Letterman, before your time, is famous for being the reason Madonna, also before your time, got her front teeth separated. It's a status thing. Oh, I'm glad to know it's a status thing. I just thought I had lost one of my front teeth. Alice says, could we get a link to your book? Yeah, I'll give links to my blogs. I'll give links to 3 of my blogs. I haven't been blogging lately. I blogged a lot. Then I wrote a bunch of books, and then I started live streaming. And my live streaming doesn't give me a lot of time to write. Okay, I'm going to say good night now, and I will revise the description, and I will put up the links to my blogs. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for staying. Thank you very much for your questions. I enjoyed the discussion very much. Good night.